Actually, yeah, turn off all the lights then. So, yeah, because I have this here. Okay, great. Thank you, and thanks to you for being so loyal to be here after such a long day. I'm a site-specific performance artist and social choreographer who uses public, durational, solo or group performances to reveal how a place and a people have been formally designed, openly and secretly, both. I'm interested in how ideology, nature meaning the natural world, and experience design gender, and how this design is played out upon sighted bodies and in terms of individual and collective identity and behavior in both private and public life. And this is an image that is not about the project I'm about to show you, but a number of years ago, I did, at the height of our wars in the Middle East, I was very interested in the American male body. I have worked with masculinity for over a decade, and finding the American male body and now the Middle Eastern male body scattered, broken, burnt, dismembered throughout the Middle East. And so I went to a desert in America, the Great Salt Lake, and did a very intimate private performance for myself, which was documented. And then I went to the Middle East, to the deserts near Jerusalem, a very contested area between the Israeli and the Palestinian people, and did a similar performance there, and then put them together in a project about this anti-heroic or unheroic vulnerable masculinity called Inheriting Salt, which is a biblical term to inherit salt. But then several years later, the Warnock family, which are who are the funders of Adobe, founders and funders of Adobe software, endowed the Utah, the State University of Utah in Salt Lake City, the College of Fine Arts, with $1 million endowment to begin to bring every other year for one semester a contemporary artist with a social practice and a global practice, to bring that to the people of Utah in an effort to bring in contemporary art to them as a collective. And they did a national search, and I was very honored to be the first artist to have been called in to be the first Warnock artist in residence out of this endowment. And as with almost all my projects, it kind of triggered a year of research and visits and conversations about this place that had been colonized by religious pioneers who were fleeing persecution, whom we know as the Mormons, and the Utah territories, the land of the Utes, the native people of the region. And in the end, I went into to teach a master class in public performance art, and what happened was a project that was called Awaiting. And it became a project about this kind of social contract, the Mormon polygamist social contract. There you have Brigham Young and his 12 apostles, who out of the desert created this kind of utopian city that is Brigham Young, his statue at the state capitol. He's walking, his very powerful male body, as opposed to the body of Eliza Snow, one of his many wives, who is one of the Mormonism's most famous poets and mystics. He is walking the landscape with his walking stick, dressed in formal Western wear. She is sitting and waiting for the Lord and for her husband. In the Mormon social contract, at a time of her wedding, a woman receives a sacred secret name. One of our colleagues was talking about how in South Korea, a woman's name kind of vanishes And so in Mormonism, when a woman marries, she remains publicly known as what she was baptized as, but privately she has a secret name only her husband knows, and that is the name by which he will call her from the grave to enter heaven, because he is her entry into heaven. You can only enter heaven if you are married within the Mormon social contract. We ended up designing a project about the act of waiting, about how gender was defined for women in this society as a space of waiting, waiting for Jesus to return, waiting for your husband to call your secret name to enter heaven, waiting for your husband to come home because your life is about bearing children and taking care of male and female children and the husband. And your role is one of fertility. And so in the end, we did a performance that lasted 12 hours from sunset to sunrise. And we chose the state capitol, which is one of the few so-called secular spaces in Utah. Utah is really a religious state, though it appears, public relations wise, like a secular state, but it's really a religious state. And yet this particular building, the House of the People, which is a carbon copy of the state capitol in Washington, completely disproportionate to the valley, to the Great Salt Lake Valley where it sits. This building pretends to be a secular space in, like I said, an otherwise religious state. And so we chose it as a kind of Jacob's ladder. It sits on one of the few hills inside the valley, so it has a very dominant position architecturally. And 100 participants dressed in whites, in bright contemporary whites, secular clothing, waited, simply embodied the act of a woman's waiting for 12 hours. And so we congregated before the wall that is at the base of the Capitol. We congregated as almost 100 performers in white shortly before sunset. And then we spend the next 12 hours all night long, and you will see it, walking the hill, walking up and down the hill in this repetitive act of waiting where nothing is happening and everything is happening, where the body is physically walking nowhere, but psychologically walking everywhere, where the performers engage in 12 hours of silence, kind of seeking a way, a sort of interiority that would revisit their life experiences, that would revisit the place, that would also create a kind of no mind to give them a chance to see the place anew. These were all Mormon and ex-Mormon and what are called Gentile women, women who have never been Mormon, were not born to a Mormon family or converted later in life and then perhaps left the religion, and are referred to with the biblical term, as Gentiles. So this was mostly, I would say that if we had 100 participants, 80 were women and 20 were men. And it fit very much the profile of that community. It was mostly white women of Scandinavian American descent. There were a number of Hispanic Latino women. There were a number of Asian women, but it was mostly what might be called in America a white women's project in a space where feminism is still arriving, still very, very much arriving. What is interesting about Mormonism is that, it kind of hits the public eye mostly through the media. We may be aware of Angels in America, Tony Kushner's play. We may be aware of Big Love, the HBO series about contemporary polygamy. We may be aware of Mitt Romney's recent presidential bid as a contemporary Mormon, or we may be aware of the Book of Mormon on Broadway. So Mormonism always reaches us as a kind of caricature, as a kind of cartoon, but for these millions of women, and the church has over 13 million members worldwide. It is now very large in Brazil. In Samoa, the largest population of Samoans living outside Samoa lives in Salt Lake City. They're all converts to Mormonism. It is very surreal to see these enormously big, physically beautiful Pacific people in the Great Salt Lake. But what is fascinating about Mormonism as an American religion is that it is part of the second Great Wave, or the second Great Awakening, which happened between 1790 and 1840 in upstate New York. A young man, 14-year-old, by the name of Joseph Smith, has a so-called vision of God the Father and Jesus in a tree grove. And then a few years later has a second vision where the angel Moroni hands him the so-called Book of Mormon, and then he goes on to start the church with 6 men. They actually move to Illinois. They start a city that got to have 20,000 people at its peak, the city of Nauvoo, and where Joseph Smith was both the religious leader and the, let's say, governor. So he was an autocratic leader where church and state came together. He receives the revelation that he, as in Bible times, is allowed to have many wives, and launches polygamy, defining gender, designing the male gender that way. And he's lynched in 1844 by a mob who comes to feel that suddenly this un-American thing is happening among us. An autocratic state, an autocratic kind of king, governor, a patriarch with over 20 wives, and its own militia. Nauvoo had its own militia. So he's lynched, and that sets off the Great Migration, where thousands of Mormons and old and new converts cross the Great Plains, many of them dying along the way, not quite ready for this migration, and arrive to the Utah territories, where they start the city, which was initially called Deseret, which had its own language. When I was invited to do this project, and began to research about the Mormon Trail, 1,300 miles, about Salt Lake City, which is the Rome of America, a place that seems frozen in time because they really latched on to 1950s culture. When you go to Salt Lake, you feel that you have gone back to America in the 1950s. Suburban life, gender design, everything about it speaks to a real time warp for many of us. So when I began to research this, I read a lot on Mormon theology, and I realized that Joseph Smith taught that God is both an embodied male and an embodied female, so that the Godhead or the Godhood is a glorified couple. There's a universal father and a universal mother, which for us, it means that not only that they're co-gods, but that gender is an eternal principle. Once you're born a female, you will live forever as a female. You will never change that gender. So whoever you're born as and receive the name of Sarah, maybe in public, and the name of Jessica in private, the name that your husband calls you through the veil to enter you into heaven, that will be your gender for eternity. So it's a very interesting study in gender, gender as an eternal principle. No notion of being born many times and being of many genders, or gender being merely an illusion, as in Buddhism. Orthodox Buddhism does not believe in the male or the female, does not believe even in the notion of humanity. We're basically animals who have separated ourselves from the rest of nature through language by calling ourselves human, that kind of fantasy. So in that sense, Mormonism is really fascinating as a kind of residual reform of Christianity. Christianity as a movement worldwide from its inception until now is a movement filled with reforms, where there are always groups of people trying to bring it back to its primitive origins, to primitive Christianity, which of course, the minute that there is a reform trying to bring contemporary Christianity to its primitive state, to the time of Jesus, if you will, we're talking patriarchy, we're talking gender design coming back into patriarchy, and women being subservient to men. So in this case, it was a beautiful project where these women who were all volunteers, who came through as people who we worked together for 6 months. We did training sessions in performance. We did training sessions in art history. We did training sessions in their own history so that we inform each other. We all brought our expertises. And in the end, we basically agreed to this contract that embodied their lives of waiting, their lives of a kind of passivity. And in so doing, we also discovered the agency in waiting, how waiting was also a very active space. That did not mean, as you know, as many of you have said today, that somebody waits and does nothing, but waiting is a very busy place for women. And it is interesting to hear that in Sweden the car was designed that, you know, it breaks and the woman has to wait, you know, for someone to come and fix the motor. She has no access to the motor. Some man probably has to come and fix it for her. He has the key, or he has the tool. Mormonism, to this day, still has that kind of feature or that kind of structure about it. It was interesting because the performance actually began in 100 places. Everyone agreed to a contract of interiority, so that afternoon, after they all came from school or work or, you know, finished feeding their family, all these women went into a period of silence, dressed in silence, and began to walk to Capitol Hill. So that the performance started in 100 places. 100 performers began to walk the entire city of Salt Lake, you know, and then met at the base of the hill. And as of that point, they became one community that simply went up and down this map, this very phallic map of the stairs. And also, again, kind of conjuring the notion of the biblical ladder, Jacob's ladder, the prophet that has a dream of so-called angels, moving between earth and heaven. The project was followed, and what we're seeing here are images throughout the 12 hours. Some of the women, you see them in many of the images. They were really noteworthy, their focus and how really compelling they were. But so you see the night come in and the winds. It was incredibly cold, bitterly cold. But we really stood strong on the hill. The next morning, every single newspaper in Salt Lake City had us on its headlines, on its front page. And months later, it was declared the biggest cultural event in Salt Lake City, Utah for the year 2009, which was interesting. But it was followed. When you unleash something like this, when you reveal gender design, when you reveal the bones of somebody's life, their veins and their arteries and their fiber, you can't just leave it on the table. You know, you have to take responsibility for it as a social art practitioner. And so this was followed. Not only was it, what led to it was this incredible process of 6 months of dialogues with all these women to trust me, a visitor from New York, a gay man, a Latino man, who was coming in, yes, with credentials, but who was a total stranger to them, the true other in every way. And so to gain their trust, and for me to trust them, to trust that they would not turn this into something else, but that they would be engaged in performance art, that this would not be a yoga class or a kind of religious procession or a kind of Occupy Wall Street sort of moment, though that happened many years later, because we were basically staging the metaphor of their lives based on the word or the verb to wait, defining their lives. And there were many, it was a very contested performance. I mean, we first sought the blessing of Capitol Hill's Cultural Office, and in fact, the State Attorney General read the proposal. We actually, school doesn't train us to have State Attorney Generals read our project proposals, but in fact, it was read by practically every high-ranking politician in the capital, an art proposal, and of course it was denied because it was unimaginable. There was fear that it would caricature the Mormons. There was fear that it would be indeed really a covert kind of protest. Mormons dress in white in their temple ceremonies. When you walk into the temple, if you're temple recommended, if you're married, if you have children or not, but if you're formally married and you're in good standing, and that gives you access to the temple, which is not open to the public, to non-believers, not even for tours, you change into special temple whites. So we were using the language of whiteness, which does not belong to the Mormons, of course. It is the language of enlightenment, of discipleship in many cultures, in West Africa, among the Yoruba people, in India, in Japan it is the language of mourning. So we held on to the language of white clothing as a kind of color that first of all was a color, not a value, a color among colors, and then that was globally owned, that no one people, no one church owned it. And then we held on to silence, not as people who are punishing themselves, who are being silenced or made silent, but silence in the way that Martin Luther King or Gandhi may have used silence. Silence as presence, as a kind of moral presence, if you will, and as an opportunity for people to go deep within and to invite others to do so, because if I'm in silence and you who are watching me slow down and also become silent, then my silence has expanded times two, like a ring in a pond, and you are perhaps first my wall, my cloister wall. Now I was alone with my silence, so only you are my silence, and then someone else after you protects your silence, becomes silent too. So in the end, there are no images of the Mormon mother goddess, even though there is no real, I can't say that there's a trinity, a Christian trinity, as other Christians would describe their godhood. There is a female god, also known as the mother god, the divine female, the divine mother, the heavenly mother, the mother in heaven. And women worship her. It is forbidden to worship her. It's forbidden to talk about her. There are absolutely no images allowed of her in the Mormon church, and yet it is Orthodox belief that she exists. But it is also, and most of the male patriarchs, the prophet and his 12 apostles, which is how the Mormon church is organized to this day, say that because she's so sacred, she must remain in hiding. It is a very interesting argument. The husband, the divine father, the divine husband, keeps her in hiding so that she's not blemished, which sounds very patriarchal, as in keeping your daughter as a virgin or keeping your wife under a burqa so that she's protected from the evil world. And so that kind of mentality surrounds the Mormon goddess. After this event, we had a town hall meeting. We actually turned the Museum of Fine Arts of the University of Utah, a beautiful institution in the Great Salt Lake. We turned it into a town hall, and for one entire day, all the women who had been training for this and who were then silent for 12 hours came, and we created an event called Breaking the Silence, or Sharing the Silence, and where they all finally spoke, and they spoke about what they experienced during the performance. And there was this incredible influx of the Salt Lake community who came to listen to these women, what their experience had been, what their experience of waiting was like. They spoke about waiting. Some women got up, and it felt like the 1970s to me, and said, I'm tired of waiting. I've been waiting all my life for my husband to tell me what car to buy, what clothing to buy, what haircut to get. I mean, they just let it out. It was amazing to hear how personal and how intimate it went, to also how theological and how social it went. Because the fact of the matter is that, again, in Mormon theology, you can have a PhD as a woman, you can be the head of a corporation or the chair or the dean of a school, but if you're not married, you cannot enter heaven. You know, and so there is this incredible glitch in the theology that requires marriage. And in a way, that's what polygamy served. Polygamy not only served a society, a colonial society, where there were fewer men than women, there were many more women than men, and so there were not enough husbands to go around for all these colonists, and the men died young, and they were trying to populate in a hurry, you know, an area. So all that was a statistical fact, but at the same time, it was a society where women often did not know how to read and write, you know, were not sent to school. As our colleague was saying, how she was, the last colleague of the design section was saying that she was the first member of her family to get a college degree, and her father was concerned that getting a college degree may kill her marriage chances. So there is still this glitch in Mormonism where no matter what women achieve, their only recognized achievement is marriage and bringing forth as many children as possible, which are basically the souls that the God the Father and God the Mother produce in their divine marriage, which women are supposed to be the portals of, and for as many as possible. And it usually stops when they bring forth a Down syndrome child. Mormon women will have as many children as they can until suddenly a sonogram or a birth reveals a Down syndrome child, because also another fact is that it's a very small, tight gene pool. And so to me, as somebody who has a global practice, I mean, who performs not just in the US but abroad, I have to say, as I train and help train with Simon and others in this room, young artists through an MFA programs, you know, we speak of globalism. We speak of gender, globalism, and so on. But when we speak of globalism, we're thinking of Africa and Thailand and, you know, these other places. But there is this internal globalism to America. America is filled with isolated communities, and they're not necessarily of color. That you know, multiculturalism and political appropriateness has also kind of created a sort of filter where everything, the minute we say community, the next word is of color and working class. And yet there are amazing, enormous communities in the Midwest, the space between New York and LA, that is most of the country, and that puts precedents in the White House. You know, those people, you know, are quite culturally isolated, quite dismissed by the contemporary art world, quite dismissed, quite underestimated as too conservative politically, as too conservative religiously, as too conservative gender-wise. So I have to say that it is a huge territory that is available to you. That table that you guys did, make it a collapsible, make it a modular table, and take it on the road and have it appear in an empty lot or in a park in Nebraska, in Arkansas, in the Dakotas, in Salt Lake City. You know, it is thankless. The art world will not, you know, do a review of you in the New York Times on Friday. You will not appear in Art Forum, but your ethics, your morality, you know, not traditional morality, but the morality of the now, of what we need in terms of ecology and social human rights, will be really strong. And so I have to say that these are the projects that give meaning to my personal and professional life, working with these people and then seeing after the project, having a really comprehensive project that had, you know, months of preparation and dialogue and relationships and friendship, and then this incredible moment, you know, that was a real experience. It was not a play, it was not contemporary dance. These women are bundled up as winds are coming down from those mountains, because they want to tell the world that they have spent a lifetime waiting, and somebody should pay attention to this, and maybe something should be done about this kind of gender definition. And then to do the roundup, to hear them speak, so that I'm not just the artist who came in, parachuted in, did the show, and ran out of town, but to actually then open it up. And so what happened here? What just happened here? And hear them speak about their lives, about this experience, and about wanting more. That to me is the real thing. That to me is the real thing. To witness that. To witness this kind of heroism, and I'll leave it there.